The heat in Atlanta that day was relentless, the sun glaring off the marble steps of the Fulton County Courthouse. Vermork Hastings stood before the grand entrance, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She had faced countless challenges in her life, but today felt different. A tangled mix of anxiety, anger, and unwavering determination. She wasn't just a social worker today. She was an aunt, a protector, fighting for Jing, her nephew, who had been ensnared in a justice system that had long turned its back on people like them. She glanced down, smoothing the fabric of her navy blue blazer, a small gesture to conceal the unease beneath her composed exterior. Despite the armor she wore, a lingering fear gnawed at her, the fear that no matter how much evidence proved Jing's innocence, the system would still choose to crush the truth. The memory of that late-night phone call was still vivid in her mind. Jing's voice had trembled as he recounted his arrest, merely for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. A peaceful protest had spiraled into chaos when a group of agitators began vandalizing storefronts, and the police hadn't bothered to distinguish between the guilty and the innocent. They had simply rounded up the faces they deemed the most dangerous. And so Jing was dragged into custody like a criminal, despite doing nothing wrong. Vermork remembered gripping her phone that night, fury simmering beneath the surface, but her voice remained steady. "You're not alone, Jing. I will do everything to get you out of there." It wasn't just a promise, it was a vow. As she climbed the courthouse steps, her phone vibrated inside her bag. She pulled it out to see Andrea's name flashing on the screen, a colleague from the nonprofit where she volunteered. "Vermork, just checking in to confirm tomorrow's meeting for the Youth Mentorship Program." Such a simple question, in the midst of all the chaos she was battling, momentarily eased the weight pressing down on her shoulders. "Yes, tomorrow at noon. Thanks, Andrea." She ended the call, inhaled deeply, and looked up at the towering courthouse before her. Justice has to prevail. Vermork had braced herself for everything that might happen inside the courtroom. The prosecutor's relentless questioning, the judge's skeptical glances. But she hadn't anticipated facing an obstacle before even stepping through the doors. 2 police officers stood at the entrance, their scrutinizing gazes sweeping over her, as if searching for a reason to deny her entry. One was tall and wiry, with a thin mustache. The other was stocky, his expression permanently set in a scowl. Neither of them spoke, but their body language was clear. "You're not welcome here." She tightened her grip on her bag, forcing herself not to hesitate. She had come to fight, and she would not let anyone stand in her way. The battle for justice had only just begun. The scorching Atlanta sun reflected off the marble steps of the Fulton County Courthouse as Vermork Hastings ascended, her breath steady, her gaze unwavering. She had braced herself for a difficult day, but she hadn't expected to face an obstacle even before stepping into the courtroom. Jing, her nephew, a bright young man with a passion for writing, was standing trial for a crime he didn't commit. A peaceful protest had spiraled into chaos, and the police, rather than identifying the actual culprits, had indiscriminately rounded up people who merely looked like trouble. As Jing's sole guardian, Vermork refused to let him battle this injustice alone. Dressed in an elegant navy blue suit and modest heels, she maintained an air of composure. But beneath her calm facade, anxiety churned like a storm. As she neared the courthouse entrance, 2 uniformed officers blocked her path. One was tall and lean, his thin mustache curling into a sneer. Jully. The other, broad-shouldered with a perpetual scowl. Dana. "You need to present identification," Jully said, his voice as cold as the marble walls surrounding them. Vermork blinked, her brow knitting slightly. She had entered this courthouse many times before and had never been subjected to such scrutiny. Still, She kept her expression neutral, retrieving her driver's license from her wallet and handing it over. Julie took it, but instead of the usual quick glance before returning it, he held on to it, flipping it back and forth deliberately. Behind him, Dana folded his arms across his chest, smirking. "What's your business here today?" Julie drawled, stretching out the question as if daring her to challenge him. Vermork met his gaze head-on. "I'm attending my nephew's hearing. He was wrongfully arrested during a protest." Dana snorted, amusement flickering in his eyes. "One of the rioters, huh?" His lips curled into a smirk as he studied her like she was an inconvenience. Vermork's voice remained steady. "He had no involvement in any violence. There is evidence to prove that." Julie shoved her ID back into her hand, but instead of stepping aside, he took a deliberate step closer, so close she could smell the overpowering scent of coffee on his breath. "Be careful, lady," he murmured, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "We'll be watching you." Dana chuckled beside him. "'Cause any trouble, and we'll have you in cuffs before you even know what's happening." Vermork's spine stiffened. She knew their type. Men who wielded their authority like a weapon, eager to intimidate and suppress. She also knew that reacting with emotion would only give them what they wanted. So, she swallowed her anger, ensuring her voice remained firm. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, "and I have nothing to fear." With that, she sidestepped them, maintaining a composed stride even as her heart pounded against her ribs. She could feel their eyes lingering on her, sharp and watchful, but she refused to look back. Inside, the contrast was stark. The courthouse's grand hallways, high ceilings, and pristine white marble exuded an air of order, yet Vermork couldn't shake the shadow that had followed her in from outside. She inhaled deeply, reminding herself that she couldn't let them rattle her. Jing needed her. Justice needed to be served. She moved briskly through security, slipping off her heels and placing her bag on the conveyor belt. As she stepped through the scanner, a sharp beep cut through the air. She paused, a flicker of wariness in her eyes as the officer motioned for her to walk through again. The second time, silence. Retrieving her belongings, she quickened her pace toward the courtroom. On the fourth-floor corridor, she spotted Jing. He sat on a wooden bench, his hands clasped together, his expression a mixture of tension and apprehension. Beside him was their lawyer, Linda, a sharp-witted, no-nonsense attorney. Jing stood as soon as he saw Vermork, a flicker of hope mingling with his nerves. She offered a reassuring smile and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're going to do everything we can to bring you home," she murmured. Linda nodded. "We have solid evidence. If the prosecutor is reasonable, they could drop the charges today." But Vermork knew one thing all too well. Justice was rarely served easily, especially when those in power sought to bury the truth. And the most terrifying part? She had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. Vermork tightened her grip on Jing's hand as they stepped into the courtroom. The sterile coldness of the place threatened to swallow her whole, but she refused to falter. Before them sat Judge Hendrick, her expression stern as she flipped through the case file. To her right, Marcus Doyle, the prosecuting attorney, regarded them with sharp, unreadable eyes. Jing took a seat beside their attorney, Linda, his shoulders tense, but his demeanor composed. Vermork felt his hand tremble slightly, and she gently squeezed it, offering reassurance. She knew he was scared. Who wouldn't be? At just 19, a bright college student with a future ahead of him, he had been unjustly dragged into the clutches of a legal system that too often failed people like them. "We're going to get through this," she whispered. Linda stood, stepping forward with unwavering confidence. "Your Honor, We have video evidence proving that Mr. Jing took no part in any violent activity during the protest. The footage clearly shows him standing still, holding a sign that reads, "Equality for all." There is no indication of rioting, vandalism, or any illegal behavior. She placed a USB drive on the evidence table, and a large screen flickered to life. The courtroom watched as the footage played, capturing Jing in the middle of the crowd, peaceful yet determined. There was no aggression in his stance, no destruction in his wake, only the resolute expression of a young man advocating for justice. Vermort clenched her fists as the truth played out before them. This was the evidence they needed. This was proof of Jing's innocence. But she knew all too well that truth alone didn't always secure justice. Marcus Doyle studied the screen for a long moment before turning back to the judge. While this evidence shows the defendant did not directly engage in acts of violence, his presence at a riot remains a point of concern. Linda didn't waver. "Your Honor, this was a peaceful protest that was infiltrated by agitators. My client had no involvement in the chaos that ensued. If we start criminalizing individuals merely for standing up for justice, then this system is no longer just." Judge Hendrick leaned back in her chair, her face impassive. She reviewed the evidence once more before slowly nodding. The footage clearly shows the defendant was not engaged in any violent behavior, she stated. "Based on this evidence, I find no reasonable justification to continue holding Mr. Jing. I order his immediate release." For a moment, silence blanketed the room. Then Jing exhaled sharply, as if a crushing weight had been lifted from his chest. Vermork felt tears prick her eyes. They had done it, at least for now. Justice had prevailed. Linda placed a reassuring hand on Jing's shoulder and smiled. "This is a victory," she said softly, "but we're not done yet. The prosecution can still investigate further. We need to be prepared for anything." Vermork nodded, though a fresh wave of unease settled in her stomach. This was just one battle won. Jing was free, but the system could still come after him, and outside that courtroom, she knew Julie and Dana were waiting. As they stepped into the hallway, Vermort gripped Jing's shoulder firmly, a silent warning. "We still have to be careful." Jing nodded, but she could see the relief in his eyes. At least today, he wasn't going back behind bars. But was this truly the end, or merely the beginning of a larger fight? Vermork knew they couldn't let their guard down. As she looked toward the courthouse exit, her heart tightened at the sight of two uniformed figures standing there, watching, waiting. As they stepped out of the courtroom, the sense of relief was fleeting. Just beyond the courthouse doors, Julie and Dana were already waiting, their expressions making no effort to mask their hostility. Others might not have noticed, but Vermork knew exactly what those looks meant. A warning, a veiled threat wrapped in the illusion of authority. Jing noticed them too. He swallowed hard but kept his stride steady. "Let's just keep walking," he murmured. Vermork nodded, gripping his arm as she urged him forward. But before they could get far, Julie stepped into their path, his cold eyes scanning them both. "Well, what a great day for justice, huh?" he sneered. Dana stood behind him, arms crossed like an immovable wall blocking their escape. "But I don't think the kid here will be so lucky for long," he said, his gaze darkening. Vermork inhaled deeply, forcing herself to suppress the rage bubbling inside her. "I don't know what you're trying to do, but I suggest you don't cross any lines." Julie tilted his head, pretending to ponder. "Lines? I think the kid here already crossed one when he decided to march in the streets." Jing clenched his fists, but before he could react, Vermork placed a firm hand on his arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. "I didn't do anything wrong," Jing said, his voice steady. Dana chuckled, the sound devoid of warmth. That's not up to you, kid. The real question is, will you get another chance to prove it? Vermork could feel the weight behind his words, the quiet menace. She knew officers like them, men who believed they had the power to decide someone's fate without the need for a courtroom. I'm reporting this, she said, her tone firm. Jullie smirked and shrugged. Go ahead, but just remember, sometimes reports disappear, and sometimes people do too. With that, he stepped aside, flashing a slow, taunting smile before turning away. Dana followed, but not before throwing one last warning glance over his shoulder. Vermork wasted no time getting Jing to the car. As they reached it, she could feel the slight tremor in his hands. He had tried to act strong, but those threats were not easy to ignore. What do you think they'll do? Jing asked, his voice laced with unease. Vermork met his gaze, her expression unwavering. Nothing, because we won't give them the chance. She pulled out her phone and immediately dialed Donovan, her cousin who worked with the FBI. When he answered, she relayed everything that had just happened. We can't let this go on, Vermork said, her voice firm with determination. There was a brief silence before Donovan responded. I hear you. I'll look into it. And don't worry, you won't be alone in this. Hanging up, Vermork turned back to Jing. We're not going to let them think they can intimidate whoever they want. If they want to abuse their power, we'll make sure they answer for it. Jing looked into her fierce, unwavering eyes, and he knew this fight wasn't over, but at least he wouldn't have to face it alone. Vermork and Jing drove away from the courthouse, but their minds couldn't shake the threats they had just received from Jullie and Dana. The atmosphere in the car was heavy, and Jing stared out the window, his eyes distant. Do you think we're safe? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vermork glanced at him before answering, her voice steadier than she actually felt. We won't let them do anything. I already called Donovan. If anything suspicious happens, the FBI will step in. Jing nodded, but the doubt was still there, and who could blame him? He had seen injustice firsthand, wrongfully arrested, treated like a criminal simply for standing up for what was right. When they arrived home, Vermork immediately checked the locks, a habit she never thought she would have to do so frequently. She knew Jullie and Dana could be watching. That gnawing sense of unease refused to leave her. Jing sat on the couch, pulled out his phone, and scrolled through his messages. Suddenly, he froze, then turned the screen toward Vermork. An anonymous message had just come through. We know where you live. Be careful. A surge of anger shot through Vermork. She recognized this tactic all too well. Subtle intimidation, veiled warnings, all designed to silence people. But she had come too far to back down now. She immediately called Donovan. We have a problem, she said the moment he answered. Jing just got a threatening message. Donovan was silent for a moment. It could just be a scare tactic, but we can't take chances. I'll send a team to look into it. In the meantime, make sure he doesn't go anywhere alone. What about Jullie and Dana? Vermork asked. I'll dig into their records. If there's a pattern of misconduct, we'll have grounds for a formal investigation. Vermork exhaled. She knew the FBI wouldn't act overnight, but at least they were on it. She turned to Jing, who was still gripping his phone, his expression tense. Do you think they'll actually do something? He asked. She wanted to say no, but the truth was she didn't know. I think we need to be ready for anything, she said. The rest of the evening, Vermork felt as though someone was watching them. Every time she glanced out the window, she had the eerie sensation of a shadow lurking just out of sight. She reminded herself not to let fear take over, but as night fell, it became harder. Around midnight, a noise outside startled her. She bolted upright, adrenaline surging through her veins. "Did you hear that?" Jing whispered from his room. "Stay there," she whispered back, reaching for her phone. Slowly, she moved toward the window and pulled back the curtain slightly. Outside, under the dim glow of the street lamp, a black SUV sat parked across the street. Her heart pounded. That car wasn't there before, and now it was just sitting there, engine running, but no one getting in or out. She immediately called Donovan. "They're here," she said, keeping her voice low. "Where?" "A black SUV, right across the street." Donovan was silent for a beat before saying, "Don't do anything. I'm sending people now." But just as she ended the call, the SUV's headlights shut off, and it slowly rolled forward, disappearing into the night as if it had never been there. Jing stepped out of his room, his face tight with worry. "Are they gone?" Vermork nodded, but deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. The next morning, Vermork woke up with an uneasy feeling still lingering in her chest. She couldn't shake the image of the black SUV silently parked across the street the night before. It had appeared like a ghost, carrying an invisible but chilling threat. Jing sat at the dining table, his eyes fixed on his phone screen, but Vermork knew he wasn't really reading anything. He was just as tense as she was. "Did Donovan say anything?" Jing asked, his voice slightly dry. Vermork poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from him. "He has his team investigating, but I don't think we can rely on the FBI just yet. We need to protect ourselves." Jing frowned, but before he could ask more, Vermork's phone rang. It was Donovan. She quickly answered. "Do you have any news?" Donovan's voice was low and firm. "We checked surveillance cameras near your house. That SUV wasn't just parked across the street. It drove through your area at least 3 times yesterday. They might be watching you." Vermork gripped her phone tighter. "Do you think it's Jully and Dana?" "We can't confirm yet, but there's a strong possibility." Donovan sighed. "You need to be extra careful. Avoid going out alone if possible, and if anything unusual happens, call me immediately." After hanging up, Vermork set her phone on the table, feeling a chill run down her spine. "So, they really are watching us?" Jing asked, his voice laced with both concern and anger. Vermork nodded. "It seems that way." Jing clenched his fists. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to make a move." "And we also can't do anything reckless," Vermork countered, her tone firm. "I won't let them push us into a dangerous situation." But deep inside, she knew their patience wouldn't last forever. That afternoon, as Vermork left her office to head home, she felt someone's eyes on her. She stopped, glancing around, but saw nothing suspicious. Everything seemed normal. But then, she spotted a black vehicle parked at the corner of the street, not far from where she stood. It was the same car from last night. A surge of adrenaline rushed through her veins as she quickly started walking, trying to act natural. When she reached her car and got into the driver's seat, she checked her rearview mirror. The SUV didn't move, but she knew someone inside was watching her. Taking a deep breath, she pulled out her phone and texted Donovan. "That car is back. I think they're following me." Just as the message was sent, her phone rang. But this time, it wasn't Donovan. It was an unknown number. She hesitated for a few seconds before answering. A deep, gravelly voice came through the line. "We know what you're trying to do. But don't forget, this system isn't made for people like you. Be smart, or you'll regret it." Vermork's heartbeat pounded in her ears. Who is this? But the call disconnected. She clenched her phone, her hands trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. Vermork set her phone down, staring at the dark screen as if searching for answers in the void. That threatening message wasn't a coincidence. They knew she was investigating. They knew she wouldn't stay silent, and they wanted her to be afraid. Jing stepped into the living room, his worried eyes locking onto her tense expression. "What happened, Aunt Vermork?" She looked at her nephew, her heart twisting painfully. This boy didn't deserve any of this. But now wasn't the time to falter. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "They sent a warning." Jing clenched his fists, his face hardening. "Who?" Vermork met his gaze, knowing the answer was obvious. Julie and Dana, or someone within their system. The room fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. "So what do we do?" Jing asked, his voice filled with barely contained anger. Vermork didn't need long to think. She knew she couldn't just sit and wait. She picked up her phone and immediately dialed Donovan's number. After 3 rings, he answered. "Vermork, I'm in a meeting." "They called me," she cut him off. "An anonymous call. They threatened me." There was a brief pause. When Donovan spoke again, his voice was lower, more serious. "Did you record it?" "Number, but I remember every word." "We'll investigate, but Vermork, listen to me." Donovan hesitated slightly, choosing his words carefully. "I don't want you and Jing staying home alone anymore. I'm arranging security for you." Vermork tightened her grip on the phone. She disliked the idea of someone watching over her every move, but she also knew she couldn't afford to take this threat lightly. "Fine, but I want to do something too. I can't just wait around." Donovan sighed. "Then follow our plan. Gather more evidence. If possible, find more witnesses. We need an airtight case to bring Julie and Dana down." She understood. They needed something undeniable, and if she couldn't investigate alone, then maybe she could find others who could. After hanging up, she turned to Jing. "We need to talk to others, people who have been harassed by them." Jing frowned. "You think they'll be willing to speak out?" She smirked slightly. "We won't know until we try." The two of them spent the entire afternoon reaching out to families in their neighborhood. The stories flooded in like a storm. A teenage boy who had been unlawfully detained by Julie and Dana just for walking at night. A single mother who was threatened when she tried to report police misconduct. A middle-aged man who had been beaten in a dark alley for no reason at all. Fear, anger, and desperation filled their voices. But more importantly, there was resolve. As they left the last witness's house for the day, Jing turned to Vermork. "They want justice," he said. "They want to fight." Vermork nodded. "And that's exactly what we'll do." But what she didn't know was that while they were gathering support somewhere else, Julie and Dana were already putting their own plan into motion, a plan to silence her, once and for all. Vermork stepped out of the community center after meeting with a group of local residents. The night had fallen, and the dim glow of the streetlights reflected off the damp pavement. The haunting stories of Julie and Dana's brutality still echoed in her mind. The trembling but determined voices of the victims had made one thing crystal clear. This wasn't just about Jeremiah. No, Jing anymore. This was about everyone who had ever been oppressed, harassed, and silenced. Jing walked beside her, hands buried in his jacket pockets, his sharp gaze scanning the dark alleyways. He had changed so much since his arrest. No longer the carefree college student, but someone who understood that justice didn't just arrive. It had to be fought for. "Do you think they'll actually testify?" Jing asked, his voice laced with concern. "A lot of them are still afraid." Vermork sighed. "No one wants to become a target, but we have to show them they're not alone." As they turned onto a quieter street, a cold chill crawled up Vermork's spine. She felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. "Jing?" she murmured, and he immediately understood. They weren't alone. From the other side of the street, an SUV with tinted windows rumbled to life. Its headlights flickered once, an unspoken warning. Jing tightened his grip on the strap of his backpack, slowing his steps. "D, is that—" Yes. Vermork didn't need to turn around to know. Julie and Dana had sent someone to follow them. She swallowed the growing fear, grabbing Jing's arm. "Keep walking. Don't stop." They quickened their pace, but the SUV matched their speed, its engine growling menacingly. Vermork knew they couldn't lead the car straight to their home. Her eyes darted around, searching for a crowded area, a well-lit street, anywhere that would make their pursuers hesitate. A few buildings ahead, she spotted a small diner still open. "Jing, turn in there." They nearly sprinted toward the entrance, and the moment they stepped inside, Vermork felt a fleeting sense of safety. A waitress glanced up, eyeing them curiously. "What can I get you two?" "A coffee?" Vermork said, as Jing sank into a booth, trying to steady his breath. Through the diner's window, they could see the SUV idling at the corner. The engine was still running, but no one stepped out. Vermork pulled out her phone and quickly texted Donovan. "They're tailing me." Seconds later, he responded, "Where are you?" She sent her location. "Stay put. I'm on my way." Jing glanced at her. "What do you think they're going to do?" She shook her head. "They're testing us, seeing if we're scared." But Vermork knew if she didn't act fast, the intimidation wouldn't stop at surveillance. 15 minutes later, another car pulled up in front of the diner. The door opened and Donovan stepped inside, still in his crisp suit, but with tension etched in his face. "You okay?" he asked immediately. Vermork nodded, but her gaze flickered toward the street. The SUV was gone. Donovan followed her line of sight. "They wanted you to know they're watching, and they wanted you to understand. This doesn't end here." Vermork clenched her fists. "I'm not stopping." Donovan gave a curt nod. "Good, but from now on, you don't go anywhere alone." Jing looked up. "So, what do we do now?" Donovan met both their eyes, his expression firm. "We start fighting back." Vermork sat across from Donovan in the small office of the Atlanta FBI Field Division. On the table before them lay a thick stack of documents and a small recording device blinking red. Jing sat beside her, his face serious, though traces of worry still lingered in his eyes. "We've gathered some critical evidence," Donovan said, flipping open a folder. "Many people have come forward, not just about Julie and Dana, but about a whole network of officers protecting them." Vermork narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" Donovan slid a few reports toward her. "There's a pattern. Officers like Julie and Dana don't act alone. They're shielded by a corrupt system, one that ensures they never face consequences." Jing skimmed the documents, his face growing paler with each word. "So, if we take them down, we're not just exposing Julie and Dana, we're exposing the entire network protecting them?" "Exactly," Donovan nodded. "But that also means we need to be even more careful. These people won't hesitate to use force to silence anyone who gets in their way." Vermork clenched her fists. "Do you know what they're planning next?" Donovan sighed and leaned back. "There's a high chance they'll try to frame Jing. If they can't silence us with threats, they'll discredit us." Jing swallowed hard. "How?" Donovan locked eyes with him. "By staging an arrest." A heavy silence filled the room. Vermork frowned. "They can't just arrest him without cause?" Donovan shook his head. "They don't need a real cause. They just need to create one." Jing bit his lip, staring down at the table. "So, what do we do now?" Vermork placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Her eyes filled with determination. "We won't let them win. If they're going to fabricate a story, then we'll have one of our own. and ours will be the truth. Donovan smirked, a sharp edge to his expression. Exactly, and I have a plan. The next day, Jing was advised to avoid areas where Julie and Dana might target him. Vermork was also warned not to go anywhere alone, but no matter how cautious they were, they couldn't predict what was coming. That afternoon, as Jing left a bookstore near campus, two uniformed officers suddenly blocked his path. "Hey, kid," one of them said, his tone cold and deliberate. "We need to have a word." Jing froze. "About what?" One officer pulled out a folded piece of paper. "You're a suspect in a robbery 2 blocks from here." Jing's eyes widened. "What? I wasn't anywhere near there." "You'll have your chance to explain at the station." The second officer grabbed Jing's arm. Jing jerked back. "I didn't do anything. I was right here the whole time. I have proof." But they didn't care. One officer shoved him against a wall, twisting his arms behind his back. Jing cried out in pain, his voice carrying down the street. Bystanders stopped to watch, a few pulling out their phones to record. The officers ignored them, dragging him toward a squad car. At that moment, Vermork was on her way to pick Jing up when her phone rang. "Donovan here." His voice was sharp with urgency. "I just got word. They're arresting Jing." "I know." Vermork gritted her teeth. "I'm almost there." "Don't do anything reckless," Donovan warned. "We need evidence." Vermork didn't reply. She had her own plan. When she arrived at the scene, what she saw made her blood boil. Jing was cuffed, pale-faced, pressed against the hood of a police car. A crowd had gathered, many with phones raised, shouting in protest. Vermork inhaled deeply, forcing herself to stay calm. She pulled out her phone, started recording, and marched forward. "Let him go," she demanded. One of the officers turned, frowning. "Who are you?" "I'm his legal guardian." Vermork's gaze burned into the camera lens. "And you just made the biggest mistake of your career." The officer's jaw tightened. "Step back." "I'm not going anywhere." She raised her phone higher. "Do you really want the entire city to see this?" For a long moment, silence hung in the air. The officer glanced around. The crowd had grown larger, cameras everywhere. Jing gasped. "Aunt Vermork." She tightened her grip. "It's okay, Jing." Just then, a black SUV screeched to a halt. The doors flung open, and Donovan stepped out, followed by 2 federal agents. "I think we have a situation here," Donovan said, his voice commanding. The sudden presence of the FBI shifted the entire dynamic. The officers faltered. One of them stammered a weak excuse, but Donovan didn't give them the chance. "Release the kid, now," he ordered, and in front of dozens of witnesses, the cuffs came off. This wasn't just an arrest. It was a humiliating failure for Julie and Dana. Vermork knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time, she felt like they had truly struck a blow against a system that thought they were powerless. The air in the FBI conference room was thick with tension as Donovan slammed a thick stack of files onto the table. Jing sat next to Vermork, his face still tense from the staged arrest. Though the fear of being targeted hadn't fully left him, today they were no longer the hunted. "They've gone too far," Donovan said, flipping open a file to reveal photos of Julie and Dana, along with a long list of complaints against them. "It's not just Jing's case. There are many others. They've been abusing their power for years." Vermork's grip tightened as she scanned the documents. How many of these cases were buried? Agent Peterson, the lead investigator, spoke up. "At least 24, but the real number is likely much higher." Jing took a deep breath, steadying himself. "So, what's our next move?" Donovan clenched his fists. "We need irrefutable proof. If we can link Julie and Dana to the higher-ranking officers protecting them, we can dismantle their entire operation." Vermork shook her head. We have witnesses, formal complaints, and video evidence from Jing's arrest. Why isn't that enough? Because systems like this don't collapse easily, Peterson replied. But there's one way. She placed another file on the table. A former officer who worked closely with Julie and Dana has agreed to talk. He's willing to testify. Vermork and Jing exchanged a glance. Who? Vermork asked. Peterson hesitated for a moment. Craig Halverson. He was involved in several protest crackdowns, but was recently pushed out of their inner circle after a dispute with Julie. He's scared he'll be the next scapegoat. Jing frowned. Can we trust him? We don't have to, Donovan said. We just need him to testify. Vermork crossed her arms. So what's the next step? Peterson exhaled. We meet him, and we make sure he doesn't back out. 3 days later, at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, Vermork and Donovan sat across from Craig Halverson. He looked disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes and hands that trembled slightly. He kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to be watching. They don't know I'm here, do they? Halverson muttered. Donovan leaned back in his chair, his gaze sharp. We checked. No one followed you. Halverson swallowed hard. I shouldn't be doing this. I could lose everything. Vermork tilted her head. And you think the people Julie and Dana have hurt didn't lose anything? He fell silent. You were part of it, she continued. You know exactly what they've done. Beatings, fabricated charges, manipulating the system, and now you're a victim of the same system. Halverson let out a bitter chuckle. I'm not a good guy, you know. Vermork met his gaze. I don't need you to be good. I just need you to tell the truth. He exhaled slowly, then nodded. All right, I'll testify. Donovan immediately took down notes. We need an official statement. You'll be under protection. Halverson scoffed. Protection? If Julie and Dana find out about this, I'm dead. Vermork clenched her fists. They won't be able to touch you. But before she could say another word, a loud crash erupted outside. A black SUV accelerated straight toward the cafe. Damn it! Donovan shouted. Glass shattered as the vehicle smashed into the storefront. Screams erupted as patrons ducked for cover. Vermork yanked Jing down, while Donovan dragged Halverson behind a table. A figure emerged from the SUV, and Vermork recognized him instantly. Julie. A gun gleamed in his hand, his eyes burning with fury. I warned you, didn't I? Vermork stood protectively in front of Jing. You can't silence all of us. Julie sneered. Oh, yeah? He raised the gun, but before he could fire, a chorus of sirens wailed in the distance. The FBI had arrived. Julie spun around, ready to run, but Donovan had already drawn his gun, aiming directly at him. Don't even try. The officer froze. Seconds later, Dana was dragged out of the vehicle, handcuffed on the spot. Jing watched, his heart pounding. At last, the tide had turned. Vermork squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with determination. Now, justice truly begins. The climax of justice, the final confrontation. The piercing wail of police sirens echoed through the air as FBI agents swarmed the scene. Julie and Dana were handcuffed, their faces twisted in rage and panic. Vermork stood amidst the chaos, her hands still trembling from the tense confrontation. Jing, though young, had seen too much in the past few months, but now his eyes held no fear, only determination. Donovan stepped forward, his voice sharp as a blade. Julie, Dana, you are under arrest for civil rights violations, witness intimidation, and abuse of power. Julie sneered, his eyes filled with defiance. You think you can take me down that easily? Agent Peterson, the lead investigator, stood beside Donovan. This isn't personal. This is the law. Dana struggled against the officers restraining him. "This is a setup. We were just doing our jobs." Vermork stepped closer, her voice ice cold. "Your job? Was your job to frame innocent people, beat them, and manipulate justice?" Jing clenched his fists. Vermork wasn't fighting alone anymore. Julie looked around, realizing there was no escape. The local police had arrived too, but none of them moved to help him. The very system he had once manipulated had turned its back on him. "Take them away," Donovan ordered. As FBI agents dragged Julie and Dana toward the transport vehicles, the gathered crowd pulled out their phones, recording every second. These videos would soon be everywhere. Vermork exhaled deeply, turning to Jing. "It's finally over." But just as they thought it was finished, Peterson received a call from the Internal Affairs Division. She turned to Donovan, her expression grim. "We have a problem. High-ranking officers are trying to shut this case down." Vermork's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Peterson frowned. "They're moving to bury this before it spreads." Jing's fists tightened. "We can't let that happen." Donovan nodded. "We won't." The system is shaking. 3 days later, at the FBI headquarters, the investigation expanded. More files, evidence, and witnesses came forward. Attorneys from the Justice Department joined the case, assessing the full scale of corruption. Craig Halverson, the former officer who had agreed to testify, entered the conference room. His face was pale, his expression tense. "They're watching me," he said quietly. Peterson nodded. "We'll protect you, but you need to testify in court." Halverson swallowed hard, then gave a small nod. Outside, public outrage erupted. News stations covered the scandal, and protests against police corruption spread across the city. The pressure was mounting. Donovan set his phone down and turned to Vermork and Jing. "We have arrest warrants for 3 more officers connected to Julie and Dana." Vermork glanced at Jing. "This is bigger than we thought." Jing nodded. "We've come too far to turn back now." The trial, the final battle. Julie and Dana's trial was a media sensation. Activists and reporters gathered outside the courthouse, their signs reading "Justice for All." As they entered the courtroom, Vermork squeezed Jing's hand. They had fought too hard to lose now. Julie sat at the defense table, his expensive suit unable to hide the unease in his eyes. Dana clenched his jaw, glaring at the witnesses. Jing's lawyer, Linda Martinez, stood to address the court. "Your Honor, today we are not just trying 2 men. We are confronting a system that has enabled injustice for far too long." Then Craig Halverson took the witness stand. He inhaled deeply before revealing everything: the false arrests, the brutal crackdowns, the bribery that kept Julie and Dana in power. Julie's scowl deepened, but he couldn't stop what was happening. Donovan and Peterson exchanged looks. This was the moment they had been waiting for. As the trial continued, Julie's defense team fought back, but with overwhelming evidence, their arguments weakened. Then came the most critical moment. The judge reviewed the files before lifting their gaze. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds. The courtroom fell silent. Julie and Dana guilty. Vermork closed her eyes, a wave of relief washing over her. Jing squeezed her hand. Justice had finally won. Justice established. The beginning of a new journey. The courtroom was heavy with silence as the judge delivered the final verdict against Julie and Dana. Each word echoed through the chamber, marking the downfall of those who had once manipulated power and trampled on justice. Julie and Dana, this court finds you guilty of abuse of power, civil rights violations, and unlawful use of force. You are hereby sentenced to 15 years in prison without parole. The verdict rang like a bell in Vermork's mind. Months of struggle, all the fear and injustice that she and Jing had endured. Now, at last, justice had been served. Jing squeezed her hand, his eyes glistening. "Aunt Vermork, we did it." She nodded, but deep inside, she knew this was just the beginning. As Jolie and Dana were led out of the courtroom, murmurs spread through the crowd. Some people watched in satisfaction, while others still couldn't believe what had happened. But the truth could no longer be hidden. Those who abused power had finally been held accountable. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, waiting. As Vermork and Jing stepped out, they were met with applause and chants. "Justice has prevailed!" The golden light of the afternoon sun bathed the courthouse steps where months ago Vermork had been blocked, threatened, and humiliated. Now she stood tall, fearless, and unwavering. Donovan approached, his smile subdued but filled with pride. "We did it, but this fight isn't over." Vermork nodded. "I know, we've won this battle, but there are still many out there who need protection." Hope for a better tomorrow. A week later, Jing sat at his desk, finishing an essay. He had chosen to write about his journey for justice, how a single decision could change an entire life. The front door opened and Vermork walked in, placing a stack of documents on the table. "Jing, the FBI is launching a deeper investigation into other officers in the department. We might have started something bigger than we imagined." Jing smiled. "That's amazing. Do you think the system will ever truly change?" Vermork met his gaze, her expression firm yet hopeful. "No one changes a system overnight, but every small step makes a difference, and you've been a part of that." Jing nodded, feeling a new sense of purpose stir within him. Outside the window, the sky over Atlanta was clear and bright. Today was a new day, a fresh beginning, and they were ready to move forward. Lessons from the fight for justice. Vermork and Jing's story is more than just a personal struggle. It is a symbol of perseverance, courage, and unwavering belief in justice. It teaches us that while the system may be flawed and injustice may take many forms, change is possible when enough people stand up and fight for what is right. The most crucial lesson is that courage does not come from physical strength, but from an unyielding spirit that refuses to bow to oppression. Vermork had no power, no weapons, only her belief in justice and her determination to protect her nephew. That alone gave her the strength to push forward, even in the face of threats and danger. Jing, once just a young man who wanted to fight for what was right, learned that justice is never handed out freely. It must be earned through relentless struggle. He realized that waiting for the system to fix itself was not enough. Those who are oppressed must raise their voices and take action to create real change. Their journey also highlights the power of community and solidarity. If Vermork had fought alone, she might have been silenced by the system. But with the support of Donovan, the FBI, lawyers, and brave witnesses willing to come forward, justice was ultimately served. This proves that in the fight against injustice, no one should stand alone. Finally, this story serves as a reminder of the importance of speaking out against wrongdoing. If Vermork had remained silent, if Jing had let fear hold him back, Jolie and Dana would have continued their reign of corruption, and more innocent people would have suffered. Silence enables oppression to grow, but when enough voices rise together, change becomes unstoppable. With that, Vermork and Jing's story does not simply end with justice prevailing. It sends a powerful message: never be afraid to stand up for what is right. One voice may seem small, but together they can create a wave of change that can never be silenced. Thank you for watching. If you found this video interesting or enjoyable, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and reach more amazing viewers like you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our future uploads. Your support means the world to us and keeps us motivated to create even better content for you.